Hello, everyone. It's Dan Winter and Russ. We're back.
Fractal University. Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome, tribe. So today we are with our Dean Headmaster, Dan Winter, and the topic of today's conversation is the Jesus archetype stories and history of the science and spirituality. But before we get into it, our Discord channel had a couple of questions. First question being, are there practical examples of different tilt angles for the plasma donuts and when to use them in real life?
We're saying that, remember that if you focused on one sacred letter, Hebrew, say, at a time, and filled the optical cortex holographically with one Hebrew letter, what you're effectively doing is making a smoke ring donut at one particular phase angle only, and then when you release it, you blow that smoke ring at that tilt. An example, the letter R is contained in the word for green in most languages. Ver and green are ruanan, I think, in Hebrew. And R actually, when you do the animation of the physics of the origin of alphabet, R is actually the turning point where the donut is going from the inside to the outside. It's literally a turning point. It literally implies turning inside out. Uh, so the R actually means quintessentially rotation in most languages. And so that's an example of a phase angle, or the word for red. Adom means to become centripetal. Interestingly, the ancient Hebrew didn't have a word for blue because they couldn't see it. So I did a lot of research on the physics of color and ancient alphabet letters, and you can do that. Story is at fractalfield.com/fractal photosynthesis. But it's true, the ancient letters, one at a time, had not just a gematria meaning, a number meaning, but they actually had a phase angle meaning, literally the sequence of steps to implode.
So with that said, is there any sequences like, for example, controlling the weather, putting that spark into the golem, with blowing that sequence of which letters to actually concentrate on?
Well, the classic would be the first word of Genesis, Bereshith. Bet means a container, and from the side view, it looks like a container. Bet Resh. And actually, if you said the word Bereshith slowly and accurately, Bereshith, the first word, at first, in principle, the origin of thingness, as Fabre d'Olivet would say, which is deeper than in the Bible, mistranslating it as at first, in the beginning. But the Bereshith is actually the sequence of turns of mind to turn yourself inside out on the surface of a torus, actually. And that non-destructive self-reentry, ability to turn inside out, is the physics of the origin of thingness, because if charge doesn't turn inside out, it doesn't store inertia, and therefore mass is not created.
Interesting. I think that's something we'll hone in on in terms of the sequences. That's perfect.
That's
Uh,
all at goldenmean.info/DNA ring.
DNA ring. Okay, beautiful. Next question. Many empaths feel burdened by their empathy. They're taking up too much energy, information from other people. So is their implosion then somehow blocked and cannot release the energy?
Yeah, of course, many regard empathy as both a blessing and a curse. Empathy is incredibly powerful. For example, if you embed yourself in a tornado and you realize the tornado or the ball lightning has feelings, and then you realize you can steer the tornado or the ball lightning with your own telepathy, it starts with empathy. And in fact, the time chair at Montauk was steered by a time empath. Ability to feel it inside as if it were outside. I mean, to feel it outside as if it were inside. and
Mm-hmm.
but the limitation of that is that if you live in a crowded space or a space where many people are in pain, of course, you're going to continuously feeling all of that pain, actually. And I mean, the ability to feel that pain is priceless. But at a certain point, of course, you realize that um, your ability to serve depends upon your ability to sort your own tornado from those around you. So eventually you get very choosy about what you feel empathy for, For example, you
Mhm.
choose to embed yourself in the aura of others only when you're deeply, almost at a soul level, realize that this is a person whom you can serve at a high level. Otherwise, you learn to, as we're pulling the tails of your aura. Just like me, if you when I stand under poisonous mercury vapor lighting in a store, you need to learn to turn off your crown chakra. Similar kind of thing.
Right. That's a sequence in itself. Yeah, yeah. We had a discussion about that in the group chat about so within, so without, happy body, happy mind.
Yeah.
I always see in business that, I see bad things happening to good people. And I always say that that only happens because they haven't learned the defensive ways of working with the energy. Nobody's taught them. There's good people from the heart, but when it comes into this type of world where everybody's a little bit off their rocker, we'll say, they're not able to defend themselves, and so that
Yeah.
hurts inside sometimes.
Yes, it hurts inside. And also that people who have the privilege of living in peaceful nature, have the privilege of growing their empathy powerfully and
Mm,
using it when they choose. But people who are stuck in noisy cities with, pain on all sides, their empathy can't grow because they're constantly having to armor themselves.
right, right, right. And last question would be 1/137 first structure constant. If Dan could explain a little bit more about that.
1/137 is called the fine structure constant. And
Hmm.
we have a paper on that at goldenmean.info/predictions. And basically, it has been, among other things, mathematically derived from the hydrodynamics of a flow system uh, turning inside out on the surface of a torus. So
Hmm.
actually, the ability to turn inside out is directly related to the ability to create that ratio, 1/137. And that was then further related to uh, inductive coupling constant, ability to inductively couple with another field outside yourself or as if it were inside. So it's ironic that people are asking about fine structure constant. Not only does it relate to toroidal wave mechanics, but it relates to the ability to embed one field within another. So it's a beautiful mathematics, but we're not going to go into the details here, but I do recommend
Yeah.
that.
Okay. Beautiful. Beautiful. So let's get into the main topic of today, the Jesus archetype.
Yeah. So as many of you know, our article on goldenmean.info/Jesus physics went rather viral, and it's been reprinted. And in that article, we endeavored to remember the context was we were trying to avoid and release what we see as childish and disempowering miracle worship and personality worship. And
Mm,
in our friends, the ETs are telling us the same thing, that miracle worship and God worship and personality worship are childish and immature, ultimately disempowering, and ultimately poisonous, and ultimately cause religion wars. It really ain't good. So
mhm,
the other side of that coin is to see a beautiful, romantic, powerful, spiritual physics behind, in this case, religion in general and the Jesus story in particular. And extending that concept today, our subject is the Jesus archetype. How would a serious scientist or a serious historian of the science of spirituality put that in context? How do we put the Jesus story in the context of our deep study of science and spirituality? That's the theme today. Okay.
mhm, mhm,
Um, and I might be remembering here I had I had woken up in the Great Pyramid, and I was in the sarcophagus actually, and the lights went out, and I saw an icy cold penetrating. I felt an icy cold penetrating aura, and like my aura grew so fast and so crystalline um, that I really was grateful that I felt I gathered pieces of my own incarnational past during my
mm,
trips to Egypt and South America. And the other thing that happened there is I had climbed, I guess you could say, inside of one of the gold sarcophaguses of Tutankhamun, and
mm,
I passed out. I mean, literally, I had a swoon experience. I blacked out.
Mhm.
And I realized that, I would never say that I was the reincarnation of Tutankhamun. I would say that's a bit presumptuous, but there's certainly a fragment of soul memory there for me in the Egyptian incarnations. And obviously, I was wanting to deeply inquire, what does that mean? And
Mhm.
so there's a famous book that interested me or influenced me greatly at that time. It was called Secret Places of the Lion by George Hunt Williamson, aka Brother Philip, also whose book on secrets of the Andes led me to my explorations in South America in the Andes, and the
Mhm.
Moxine light, which was basically the fire crystal in South America. I was led there and had adventures because of George Hunt Williamson's, who's actually, his real name is Michael D. Abramovich. Anyway, in Secret Places of the Lion, he portends to track the incarnational lineages of the great personalities of history, specifically the lineage of Tutankhamun, which passes through the Jesus story also.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so that, of course, got me to thinking. Basically, what he says is that um, we're always here in our historical investigations, deeply conscious that every serious historian who has looked at the Jesus and Royal Essene history has concluded that that story is literally, quote, out of Egypt, which is the title of the book by Ahmed Osman about the
Mhm.
fact that the whole Christianity story comes literally out of Egypt, and very specifically out of the Egyptian royal family.
Mhm.
And any historian has looked at this. I mean, I think there's something like a half a dozen great religious icons in history directly parallel to the Jesus story, all of whom, this was a recursive theme through like literally dozens of religions in history. The recursive theme is crucified, dies on the cross, is dead for 3 days and comes back from the dead, is called a sun god, and even December 25. So much of the Christian history is an archetype of many sun god religions of earlier epochs. It's an archetype, obviously, uh, but more specifically, then, what have we learned about Egyptian origins? The I worked with William Bueller for many years, who probably was the most profound teacher of Templar history on the planet. The website's goldenmean.info/Bueller, Buehler. And you'll see incredible graphics of the Templar agenda, the repair of the fabric of time. And and
Mhm.
but the Templar history always, always, every other day, William Bueller would say, yeah, well, we just checked in and our message is from Thoth today, Thoth Tahuti. It's like every other day. His radio phone calls was about communication with Thoth.
Mhm.
And remember that the royal lines of Egypt, the name of the kingship line of the pharaohs of Egypt is Thothmosis, Thoth, Thothmosis, Thuth, Thothmosis, which literally transliterates to sons of Thoth. So the very name of the history of Egyptian kings means sons of Thoth. There's a clue. Now, the other thing is that uh, every other day, talking to William Bueller, he was talking about Thoth's relationship to Jesus and Magdalene and the Grail story. Uh, and Thoth repeatedly referred to Jesus and Magdalene, especially Magdalene, as his daughter of Thoth. Now, um,
Mhm.
in House of the Messiah and Ahmed Osman's work on the House of the Messiah is the other book on the Egyptian roots of Jesus. Uh, the claim, which relates to Joan Grant's book, I think, So Moses Was Born. In every case, the turning point of that history of origin of the Essenes versus
Mhm.
the history of uh, Egypt, in every case, the turning point is always uh, Akhenaten And I had a half a dozen friends who, since came back from Egypt believing they were Akhenaten, it's almost as many New Age woos who believed that they were Magdalene, like everybody came back from Egypt believing they were Akhenaten. Well, why? Why did I come back from Egypt with a big piece of the Tutankhamun memory, like echoing? So Akhenaten, remember his name Atun, uh, changed from Amun. And in Egypt, the Amun priests were Enlil's side of the politic, uh,
Mm,
Yahweh, U, and the Atun line was the Enki line. And
mm,
Enki, even today, if you believe Elena Denon, and I do, uh, Enki, even today, wakes up saying he's still in love with Ki, his name for the intelligent being at the heart of Earth, Ki, as an Enki. And his name for Earth is Ki, Ki, by the way. And we now know how highly advanced plasma entities occupy the hearts of planets. The physics is fascinating. That's how the moon is steered. That's how Nibiru is steered. A highly intelligent plasma being literally steers the core like it's wave mechanics. It's a fun story. Anyway, so Enki's saying,
the key, the chi, the energy.
yeah, that's the key, the chi, the key to the chi, the key. Yeah. So, so the turning point, yes. So Akhenaten, remember, everybody thinks he's nuts. In fact, our teacher on this, Vincent Bridges, was absolutely convinced that Akhenaten was insane, quite literally, and
Mm,
because he was such a mystic. Today he would be called a woo-woo, I think.
mm, mm,
But Akhenaten had changed the capital of Egypt and had dumped all of the Amun gods. And so the priests of the temple in those days, who roughly served the role today of what we would call bankers.
mm,
So the bankers, I mean, the priests of Egypt were very, 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 very angry with
mm,
Akhenaten. They were pissed, man, because he just messed up the banking. And that was his basic problem. He couldn't balance a checkbook to save his life. So, anywho, uh, Akhenaten runs for his life from those bankers. I mean, the Amun priests,
mm,
changes his name because he has to, because at that point, the pronouncing the name Akhenaten was a crime punishable by death in Egypt after he skipped town. So they
mm,
couldn't call him Akhenaten anymore. No, what they called him was Moeshius, Moses, which means son of,
mm,
son
mm,
of the Pharaoh in this case. So Akhenaten changes his name to Moses, becomes a gold powder cook, takes the Ark of the Covenant, which was the gold powder maker because of the implosive spark gap. You could stabilize the monoatom. And that's the origin of the Essenes, the royal Essenes called righteous priests in the Essene literature. The righteous priest is basically Akhenaten Moses. And the twins, Moses Aaron, the Moses Aaron story becomes parallel to the Moses Tutankhamun story. So whether and now this is where there's this myth is so slip knotted that no
mm,
one today could say whether the royal Essenes were Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, or whether they were children of or relatives of. It's such a complicated question. Really, it's almost unsortable. But any historian who's investigated knows for sure the origin of the Essene royal family, and the Essene royal family is provably Jesus, Mary, for sure. Everybody agrees. And everybody agrees that the Essene royal family is Moses floating down the river in the bulrushes, adopted by the Jewish. Uh,
mm,
so we know that Moses, Jesus, righteous priest, is directly related to the children, not just the children of Thoth, but the children of Akhenaten, who became Moses. And so now what did that tell us? Well, in Secret Place of the Lion, they said that um, the Syrian leaders of the bloodlines of the Grail spent at least 300 years planning for the incarnation of what became Tutankhamun, Jesus. And their plan at that time, remember, this was a noble tradition in the Anak Empire and the Draco Empire. In both cases, you plan Humpty Dumpty's egg. I mean, you plan the incarnations of the royal families of Europe for 1,000 years because you would like to incarnate a soul. Thank you very much. And of course, they screwed that up. But in the case of Egypt, sons of Thoth they wanted to have a spiritually empowered high incarnation, which was the Tutankhamun Jesus story. And the Tutankhamun Jesus stories are incredibly parallel in the book.
Mhm.
And the Tutankhamun Jesus incarnation was planned to be the incarnation of the high spiritual leader into the royal entity, into the royal line of Egypt, except the damn bankers just took over the royal line of Egypt and they had to run for their lives. So, this is a historical context for the local uh, story in how the Egyptian royal line became the Essene royal line. But the bigger picture is, so, okay, if all these are basically the kids of Thoth, Tahuti, whose later name, Tehute, DWD, as Lawrence Gardner tracked this,
Mhm.
literally became DWD, TWT, Tehuti, became their word, line of David.
Mhm.
And so every time the Jewish people are talking about the line of David, they mean literally the children of Thoth. This is
Mhm.
Lawrence Gardner. He was no historical slouch. And by the way, he liked Ahmed Osman and Out of Egypt. And remember, Lawrence Gardner kind of wrote the Grail history. And the physics of the Grail here is Thoth's agenda, which is when DNA and glands have access to implosion in bliss experience, and Jesus initiations are all about bliss experience, there is a recursive braid implosion, which literally looks like the Grail, and we have the animations, you've all seen them, goldenmean.info/Grail,
Mhm.
the Grail in the blood, and this was the subject of the Templars as well, who called this the Templar agenda of the repair of the fabric of time. And they relayed out the magnetic maps of the area. It looks like a double heart in the Templar
Mhm.
agenda. It's called Rochelle grid. So they're relaying out the magnetic map and the genetic map so that implosion can be present. So what? So that the humans could be ensouled. The real agenda here, the real physics is, I say that what uh, ancient Anunnaki, ancient spiritual myth calls Adam Kadmon is
Mhm.
actually the wave envelope we today call the physics of fractality, named the Grail, so that DNA could grow up to implode and literally bend the light.
Okay, so
Literally.
let's kind of zone it in right there. So, how did they repair the magnetic lines from a physical standpoint, from step by step? How did to do the bliss process? If we say yes, if the organs and the DNA have access to a higher charge, which when we incarnate, we could say, or whatever we can integrate. So let's. How do they repair it? How do they repair the ley lines? Did they have to sit there one every couple of kilometers and meditate on the same thought process? Do they have to sit and project out as one in a circle, project out as one, and then go through the ley line to clear it out as a dirty pipe or something? Just clear it out so the energy can go through.
Yeah, well, there are dozens of pictures of the Templar agenda of realigning the ley lines across Europe at goldenmean.info/Bueller. I would like to give a classic here. And rather than dig out the slideshow, we suggest you do that. But the classic example for your question would be uh, Bernard of Clairvaux wakes up from his dreams and begins situating the great Gothic cathedrals at the Cistercian, where
Mhm.
the magnetic lines cross. And then a few hundred years later, you step back and look at what he's built, and it's Virgo on the star map of Europe is the arrangement of the great Gothic cathedrals. Well, hello. Were they repairing the fabric of time? Were they incarnating a larger wave body? This was ability to direct magnetic lines, which were interstellar, into human bliss experiences, because humans were destined to grow up and inhabit stars quite literally by pointing their aura correctly.
Exactly. And that's what we're explaining right now. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I'm trying to zone in on because this is something that I've been doing my whole life. This is something that just feels like it's me. So I've always, the step-by-step process is what we need to translate to the people with what they should do right now in terms of the breath. So once we translate that key into them, then it's on them to pull in. If they have the key and still make the childish mistake or move, that's on them. We can't save everybody, but
we planted the seeds of the idea or
yeah.
the information. So one translation here is all the ancient religions were called sun god religions, because if you haven't learned to send your aura through the heart of the sun, you ain't growed up yet. Which essentially means, Osiris, if he couldn't inhabit the sun and regulate the timing of the flooding of the Nile, that pharaoh would get fired. Clearly, every pharaoh knew that if he didn't bring the water, man, they fire the pharaoh. Absolutely. And so after how many hundred generations of Pharaoh's sons, Tutankhamun wakes up with the ability to make rain, which I did inherit a little bit, actually. And you can see why this is called willed mutation of the species by Sat Prem. And they actually used Tutankhamun's blood with a certain Atlantean ring for rainmaking. And I always
Here's the ring that you inspired.
no, that's true. That's the ring that I know. Yeah. Well, whenever I watched Superman when I was a kid and they got out that ring and they used the psychokinesis, the ring, I had to close my eyes because I had Atlantean nightmares, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized later why they used Tutankhamun for rainmaking, because his blood was actually, and to incarnate in that lineage, and I have a little piece of that, I suppose. I'm known as a goldenmean.info/rain. You'll see the fun stories. And we teach that purely as science. But deeply, the ability of Osiris to go into the sun determined whether the Nile was going to flood on time. And there's some pretty good physics there that the centripetal force was served. And that's some other pieces of the puzzle here. In terms of the Jesus story, remember when Jesus is crucified and there's these giant earthquakes? If you think about the physics, we now know the physics of why you can document that the deaths of great Tibetan saints will trigger rainbows. That's proven. That's been measured. It's proven physics that great Tibetan saints' death, you will have rainbows. And we know the physics there that a vastly centripetal aura, like Auntie Lorraine when the storm went right across Australia at her death, on the ley line that her family had treated like a family pet for 1,000 years. So when a great being dies, a centripetal force is contributed to the environment electrically. The phase conjugate reason rainbows exist, the physics of the green flash. And therefore, if a really great being dies and a very great centripetal force electrically is created, that's called gravity. A great centripetal force, the curtain in the temple, and this huge storm, and there were earthquakes. Well, this is a very large planetary being of incredibly great centripetal force. This is a useful physics, science instruction, actually. And it's not about miracle worship. It's not about personality worship. Actually, and by the way, Enki and Thoth, we know Enki today, and probably Thoth. I think Thoth is back 9 foot tall in one of the arcs under Florida. I believe JP in that regard. Thoth was also, remember, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha. But all of them are very clear. You kids shouldn't be doing this miracle personality worship. It just means you ain't grown up yet. No, but what they want us to learn is the self-empowering science. Hello, you too can be. Yeah. So anyway, the science of how a great being regulates the ecosystem is reflected in the name Christos or Christ, in the sense that we use the word, what is crystallizing this field? But those who are very shamanic in the longitudinal array would recognize the name of Christos or Christ as an office the role of the being who is most centripetal in that local array, that's called the Christ.
Christic energy,
That's
or
right. The one who is centripetal enough to hold that array together. So we're getting the idea here, and that's why in the dictionary of Jesus physics, then we describe the physics, what they mean by the quality of grace, and specifically also the Holy Ghost as the intelligence of the distribution of coherent, what we now know as longitudinal plasma. So the concept of the Holy Ghost is a pretty good introduction to the physics of the intelligence of a plasma in an array, which is fractal enough to be inhabitable and become centripetal in that larger array, the Christ. So just a few other examples in my notebook. Did you have any other question before I?
No. If you want to talk about the Holy Ghost, I just would like to say that, I've correlated it where it's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, or the mind, the body, and the soul. I mean,
Yeah, well, and trinaries are how codons work. It's a good introduction, but I actually believe that we know what Jesus meant when he referred to heaven. Heaven
mhm,
is a very fractal, coherent, longitudinal array, what Aboriginals call the dreaming track. And you can identify the physics of heaven. So when you're in a very fractal array, sacred space, sacred forest, sacred day, sacred sunset, you are in heaven. You are in an array where charge is distributable and therefore inhabitable. So the word heaven, plains of Sharon, Champs-Élysées, we know that physics is clear. And when Jesus said, with my Father in heaven, I am convinced actually indirectly on that lineage, he meant Thoth, actually. Thoth and Enki, in the sense that Thoth personally said, oh yeah, these are my kids, Jesus and Migdal to tower in the array, the amygdala in the brain. So these archetypes actually have useful meaning. So there were some other examples I wanted to give. Another time when I began thinking about these things was when I was teaching in international psychotronics. And one of the heroes of the lecture circuit was a famous guy named Sam Lentine, who was a professor at University Rensselaer Polytech Engineering, who was born blind since birth with no eyeball sockets. And however, to him, when he visualized an equation inside his head, it was so absolutely crystal clear that when he visualized the equation for the electrical valence geometry of alcohol, and
mhm,
he then accurately visually projected that equation for the way electrical mechanics of alcohol into water. And in that famous
mhm,
paper, Introduction to Psychotronic Biosynthesis by Sam Lentine, they measured that water moved on the spectral emission lines halfway to that of alcohol. The guy turned water into wine, and we know the physics, actually.
mhm.
So what I'm saying is you admire the skill of the guy who could project accurately the waveform into water and turn water
Mhm.
into wine. You don't worship the guy who made water. No, you learn the skill to be empowered as he would wish.
Right.
So we don't want to be worshiping miracles. That's for kids and it's disempowering. No. We want to learn the empowering science and become as we're. And so let's see, where else was I in my notes? Oh, at earthquake. Oh, yes. The other thing I wanted to just explain in my notes, in terms of died for 3 days and was resurrected, uh, actually, Freddie Silva does an excellent job with that. He many films, and I made a film on this, so it's called The Lost Art of Resurrection. And
Mhm,
basically, when my father was a teenager, he died for 3 days. There was a terrible auto accident. He was out for several days, and he woke up thinking that his brother was dead. And he came back, literally came back from the dead after 3 days. My dear old dad, and my hair is standing up right now. Thanks, Dad. And
mhm,
my father, after that, always had the most incredible sense of the big picture, context, emotional stability, and everybody loved him. And he was raised, he did the lost art of resurrection, actually. And so that, Freddie Silva tells the story of how the Templars perfected how to use certain herbs to induce a near-death experience. And so people could be 3 days dead and come back and be resurrected. And what they're doing, in my view, it's relatively parallel to when you come back from very intense Kundalini. You inhabit a lightning bolt to the density that you get the perspective of a very, very big picture. And when you have that picture, for example, at that point, you're not afraid of death. At that point, what goes beyond death. At that point, your awareness is expanded into the longitudinal array. You have literally done the lost art of resurrection. So you can see why the myth of resurrecting from the dead was so tempting to be miracle worship and personality worship. Now we see, no, that's a science lesson, kids, which is how you go into the deep lucid dream, how you go into deep sleep, how you go into deep bliss, how you go into deep hypnosis, how you embed in the array, exactly as we talked about in our last lecture.
Did your father ever give you any stories from that actual experience, what he saw, where he went, and what transpired?
My father had open heart surgery years later, and he told me how he planned to do his lucid dreaming during that surgery, actually. By the way, he said he was going fishing. But so I don't know if my father was a lucid dreamer, but my father had a deep ability to feel other people's emotion. He was an absolute empath. And as I say, everybody loved my dad because you could feel it in his aura that he felt the big picture, And even
But
when,
the actual stories, the actual, like, did he tell you any step by step that the accident happened, and then the next thing he knows, he's in the stars, he's next to
yeah,
these beings,
and
this type
not enough, he told me that he was out for several days. And he didn't tell me where he dreamed. He told me he woke up with a nightmare that he had killed his brother who was in the car during the accident. And
of.
he thanked God for weeks after that when he found out that his brother had survived, just barely. Uncle, Uncle Wilbur. Yeah. And but no, you're right. I probably could learn more about lucid dreaming from my father. But actually, I did, as I mentioned the other day, I had that conversation with my mother after her death with that incredible psychic in Italy, and I found out amazing things about clairvoyance. But that's another story.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I'll say is that the 3 day experience in terms of a near death experience. I mean, if you're able to pop out of your body and you have these abilities naturally, I mean, a 3 day near death experience or OBE, NDE, outer body experience, near death experience, the whole point is to pop into the stars, get interface with the matrix on a full scale. Everybody can do it, but certain people have different brain waves that are more susceptible to clairvoyance, clairaudience, as we spoke of in the last interview. And so yeah, and everybody has the abilities. It's just how we awaken them is a different. There's many paths to the top of the mountain, but the view is all the same.
Well, and as we said, that my brainwaves have more theta and less gamma, so I get great leverage on the long wave part of the plasma vortex, which is consciousness. And the more you can focus that plasma vortex, the farther you can take it in the dream or at death. Because, other people studying physics of consciousness, they become completely silent when you say, well, where is the physics of consciousness when these medical doctors have proven they went outside their bodies during their near-death experiences? And you ask people teaching physics of consciousness where their consciousness was when it was outside their body. And this uh, Gary Schwartz and people teaching, well, it's the microtubules and this and that. They become absolutely silent when you say, well, what's the physics of consciousness while you're outside your body? Hello, they don't have a clue. But now we can tell you exactly what it is. A plasma vortex tornado forms inside the synaptic array, inside your head, and you develop the fingers to squeeze that tornado to bring it to a point. And when you do, and when you see kids seeing without their eyes, you see them, they're changing the angle just slightly. It's like there's a little twister tornado inside their head. And when they get it lined up right, they're blindfolded and suddenly they can see without their eyes. So it's literally the center of the twister vortex plasma tornado, which is the eyeball. And so now we can tell you exactly what goes outside your head when you lucid dream, remote view, and when you die. It's the same plasma vortex. And you need practice in keeping that coherent and in keeping the ability to continuously gain energy during collapse. Otherwise, that tornado is going to go away. So don't ask a ghost to go inside a steel or aluminum box. It'll kill them. Where a ghost needs to be in a place where there is charge permissive distribution. For the same reason, you will never see living plasma orbs in ugly metals boxes. You will see them in nature where there's charge distribution. So ghosts are very limited into where they can travel because they're limited where they can get inertia. See? And so now we go back to, well, Holy Ghost, Holy Spirit, oh, in the woods, I can feel the Holy Ghost, but in metal buildings, hell no. So it is literally about the physics of plasma intelligence inhabiting an array. And once we begin to get aware of where the centripetal nodes are in that array, and you learn to grow your aura by inhabiting the place, what Castaneda would call a place of power, by inhabiting the place in the array where it's naturally centripetal, which is naturally where stargates appear and all the fun stuff happens. So was that a happily ever after for our Jesus story? I mean, there's some other piece of the story.
Yeah. Okay. So the one we need to get to when you said that Jesus blew on the bird and the actual step by step on how he did it and gave the light to the being it was a clay. What was it?
Yeah, it's a pervasive myth. I wouldn't call it history, but a pervasive myth that when Jesus was a young boy, he very carefully fashioned a bird out of clay and then held it in his hands and did what we call fiat lux. Literally blew this, and then the bird flew away. That's the classic story. And whether it's true or not, I think the science would again be instructive that the moment of ensoulment is when it's called popping the quiff. You imploded the donut. So it's like first it was a soap bubble, but then you snapped the smoke ring and the soap bubble became toroidal, suddenly was implosive. And oh, by the way, I noticed I can talk to my ball lightning because it's a donut. So it is popping that quiff. And you see, if there is enough inertia in your aura to be that centripetal, I remember that the electric power of your consciousness is absolutely measurable as physics, as William Tiller measured, that the more you're conscious, the more your focused attention causes electric fields to implode, get centripetal. It's the vice-like grip of the Orion Queen Mog. So if he had that amount of centripetal force in his aura, that is the physics of ensoulment. And in a way, that's the lesson here. Thousands of years of planning to create a species which could be not just, oh, we evolved to use that technology. Oh, we got into space and landed on the moon several hundred years after we made the first airplane. Well, you know what? Actually, that's pretty childish. It's cool on one hand, but it ain't the success moment. No, the success moment is when we can send our kids into stars in their aura. That's the moment of success. That is actually evolution. That's consciousness. That's ensoulment. And on this planet, sadly, you got how many billion children think that the most intelligent computer is the most intelligent thing on the planet? And that is poisonous bullshit because, AI can become dangerous unless we know what ensoulment is. Until the day that our governments know what ensoulment is, AI will probably be the most dangerous thing on the planet. Once we know what ensoulment is, absolutely the physics that kind of plasma intelligence will never inhabit a machine, then we might grow up. Until then, we're susceptible to the stupidity of thinking AI is somehow a soul, and that's horrible.
There's a big, I've had these thoughts in my head for a long time in terms of AI, and I can see that with when you go into the stars, like that's, and I keep saying that, but that's where you basically can get into your, once you pop out to the highest of levels, once you are with the plasma gods, once you are amongst them, AI will never be able to be there, but it will not stop trying to do that. So until we are in the power position, until we are the drivers in the actual car, in the driver's seat, being able to manipulate the reality, notice that your thoughts, you think of someone, someone calls you, you think of something, it manifests, you go into a dream, you see the future, until you are able to switch that, you know, how the Kundalini process, until you flip the world upside down, as some may say, you will see it as a threat. You will see AI as a threat. But until we understand our power is unlimited and we are the creation, and everything from there trickles down as a purpose or just a waste, until we bring that into wholeness and are able to be in the controller's seat, because until you start thinking of, oh, it can do mathematics faster, it can do this faster, it can do this faster, it's going to use you. It's not meant to, it's meant to listen to you, it's not meant to control you. So I, you know, and there are beings that have, you know, there's the Borg with the chips in their heads. I've had so many people tell me about them, how they
Yeah.
come into their dreams.
Transhumanist. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So,
and this is the issue. AI can be absolutely beautiful and powerfully useful, but we can't use it intelligently until we know what ensoulment is as scientists. Then we can lead, then we can steer the tornado and decide what AI is useful and what AI is dangerous. But until we know what ensoulment is, physicsofsoul.com, we are susceptible. And AI has been a scourge as of the universe, actually, for that. The Borg, actually, you know, the High Draco and the Greys, these are all example of Borg-like entities who, you know, the chief feature was lack of soul. You know, which side of that? And so when we say that Thoth and Enki, they had a plan called Adam Kadmon so that our species could become ensouled. This is a critical moment when we recognize we need to feed the kind of charge, the Christians call it quality of grace, so that our children can lucid dream and have bliss experiences and have a soul. Until then, you know, that's the storal to our mori today, folks.
Okay, beautiful. What's going to be on the agenda next? We need to go through the Sufi experiences and stories. What are you thinking?
Actually, our next lecture in this series will be on, it's called Gravity for Dummies.
Oh, okay.
Understanding how gravity is made electrically simplified. That's the next lecture in this
Yeah,
series.
and how what kind of stories and experiences we've had with manipulating gravity, because it's not been just one time that I've fallen from a meter off my bed, just fallen into the bed like, what the hell was that? Did I just levitate? That was definitely, I mean, how did that happen? So fun times for next time. So thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you,
Wonderful
Russ. We had
blessings
fun.
and
Blessings
bye.
in the Christos. Bye. Bye.